I'm surprised because I should have known about it enough, but I was introduced to the steel yard because of your trash cans and your art classes.
Yeah.
And, so the message is getting through to at least a few people that that's what you're all about.
Well, and I don't want to misrepresent and say that that's, you know, I mean, we're oversubscribed in everything that we do right now, which is great, and it's a good problem to have. But I've just been very, I think referring back to Jory's comment and the things that we talked about leading up to this, you know, are we our organization or are we something else? I think I've been intrigued by the fact that the steel yard has really been picked up in this way. And you know, really, the environmental work was something we had to do. It was just a means to an end to do what we wanted to do. And it became a much larger beast than we anticipated. So I know that the word is getting out there, and you have the experience of doing class there. But it's been funny to watch.
But it seems like, I mean, everybody's got to be dealing with the environmental situation, especially here in Rhode Island.
It's all around us.
Yeah.
And you know, that pond being a place where it's like, oh, it'll never be able to be brought back. Well, that may or may not be true, but it's pretty daunting to really examine how much it would take for organizations and groups to do these cleanups.
Well, I mean, I think that everybody loves a success story, right? And everybody's excited about that. And so it's like a big yay cheering you on from the sidelines. And so then I think the question is, what's the next project? And, you know, as long as you can make a success story there. And I mean, I already hear it because you're talking about workforce development. And we have terrible, terrible unemployment. So very much from the outside, it's sort of, I see the path, you know, so you'll get a different story then.
Yeah, and there's no question that the project has brought us a range of funders. I mean, we received $65,000 from Bank of America to do workforce training, largely because the project was so visible.
So
yeah.
Trick, I wonder if you could also tell the story, it's separate from the steel yard, but about the construction that's been happening in your neighborhood and the kind of conversation changing that you have been part of around.
Yeah.
What do you remember that story? Yeah, because I think it's relevant.
Yeah. So in my other life, I live outside of Providence now. I moved about a year ago to Western Cranston and bought a pretty old house, 1836, part of a farm, and fell deeply in love with the place. Still am, and discovered maybe a few months after being there that a fairly large development is planned for down the street. And towers and a Prakashanti group project, and kind of, you know, doesn't look very good in sketch at all. And so I went to a community meeting, and I was very moved by how many people were there and how kind of great and involved they were. And I was like, yes, you know, I've moved into a great neighborhood, and my partner's like, don't get involved. You got to stop being involved in everything. You know, sometimes come home. We just needed to see you. So, but I did get involved, and I joined a group called Cranston Residents for Intelligent Development, something like that. And it's a small group of people who've lived there forever. I am the only person who's a newcomer, but they're very welcoming. And what I noticed in the battle over this development was that people wanted to talk about two things. The link to the sewer, because we have septic out there, and everybody really wants the sewer. It's a big conversation. I don't really care, but they're very concerned. I'm like, well, I think we used to only have septic. So it's, you know, we used to put things in the backyard, and I still have an outhouse, so I don't really care. I mean, I also have indoor plumbing, but there is still an outhouse. So they wanted to talk about the sewer link, and they wanted to talk about the traffic. And sometimes you have to sit for 5 minutes at that light. And I thought, yeah, but I like that. I live out here. I don't mind the 5 minutes. Traffic, it's so bad. So I was interested in that to a certain extent because, you know, whatever it takes to win the fight. But my interest was that I'm part of a little historic district, and there's a waterway that comes through called Furnace Hill Brook that used to fuel a number of businesses, including a foundry, and there's still ruins of the foundry. So I was poking around and looking around for information. So then I discovered, I'm an archaeologist by training, that there was an extensive amount of information that the state had done on the Native American traditions there, that there's a real indigenous story, and then there's sort of the contact moment in history, and really this place is incredibly rich. turns out one of the most sort of well-documented, best understood sort of early evidence in Rhode Island. So that seemed really great, and I decided I would bring this up to the group, and I said, I think this would be a great way to maybe argue our case that there's this tradition here, and it's part of this historic district. And the historic district stops at a road. And why would it stop at the road? Because it would go with the waterways, and the waterways cross the road and go under the road. And so everyone said, no, it's traffic and sewers. And numbers in the schools, that was the other one. How many kids are going to the schools? And so, I just kept saying, well, maybe you should read this report. It's really good. And here's this picture of the way and here's this little bio on the person who owned our house and the people down the street. And so we just kind of, kept handing over the information, because of course I made my partner do this too, because he'd never seen me otherwise. So finally, my favorite guy on the group, the judge, he just goes by the judge, he asked us to come to a meeting, and we're going to get together with someone who'd written a history on the community. And we got together, and he was giving his spiel on the thing. Well, we're really concerned about the sewer and the da-da-da. He said, and we're really concerned about the history of the location and its impact, and we think we want to get the tribe involved to talk about this because, and I thought, oh my God, this is the moment, he has actually really embraced that. And he just went on to talk about, we're so concerned about this historic district because it wouldn't have stopped at the road, and it would have followed the waterways, and this is really important, and I've got a great article if you want to read it. And I just thought, isn't this wonderful, that there's kind of a change in language. And that was a really a great opportunity to think about how if you really have this thing that you believe in and kind of stay with it. I want to talk about the sewer line. So it was exciting. This is a guy who's well retired, and I think for him to sort of change his mind about something like that and then become an advocate was kind of a great moment,
Yeah, I just think it really speaks to acknowledging place in a way that's important. So even though this kind of attention has been focused on the Steelyard as a physical site, what does that do to change the conversation about the rest of the work that you do? And it's also relevant to our later evening discussion if you are able to make that about the work that Ashe is doing in New Orleans. And so thanks for sharing that.
I have a question for Holly. I know that the Urban Pond procession and the building blocks up to that event do not constitute the the first time that you've worked in a community context. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about over time how your I guess collaborative process has evolved, and then there's a second part of the question that relates to your sense of identity, and whether doing this work has changed your sense of identity. I mean, it sounds like perhaps it has in a way that scares you, but and I'd like to hear about that, but I'd also like to hear about I suppose, at this point, after doing, a number of studio projects and a number of projects that involve collaborators from different fields, how, I don't know if there is a word to define yourself, like, artist, but could you talk a little bit about the process of redefinition, I guess?
I'll try.
Okay.
Well, my practice kind of evolves out of, as a painter, by training. Went to graduate school at Brooklyn College, and felt like I needed to be in New York if I was really going to be serious as an artist, and so I was there for 15 years, and but also worked with teaching. So I come out of, sort of being an educator, art teacher kind of person, or I'm not sure that it really was art teacher. I was always interested in facilitating other people having a voice, I was always fairly shy, and so a way that I had a voice was through creating visual images. And my work was fairly narrative, somewhat telling stories. And one of the ways I worked with kids was through photography and having them photograph their lives. And then I would interview them and collect their stories that went with the photographs. And then I, worked, that evolved into, being a regular art teacher at a school at one point. But it was kind of like, oftentimes I found I was giving myself the assignments I was giving my kids, and vice versa. They were kind of like informing each other. And so that was kind of interesting to think about. And then when I moved here about 13 years ago, I was in Patuxent Village, and the reason that I moved here was I had a real sort of intuitive response to a particular house in Patuxent Village. And it was at a point in my life that I had some funding that I could make a move, and my husband and I had always talked about how we wanted to move out of New York, but how do you move out of New York? If you plan it, you'll never do it. It's like you just got to jump. So this kind of provided an opportunity, and so then I was really curious why I had this kind of very intuitive response to like wanting to move to this place, and got very interested in the history of Rhode Island, and kind of explored Roger Williams a bit, and got interested in doing some projects in Patuxent Village where I lived to try and understand that history. And one of those projects that I did, and actually the first project I did was when I met Drake. I mean, Drake was like a real supporter from the get-go. She's responsible for some of my transformation. In terms of really looking at the history of the village, but then doing this postcard dialogue project, which was a way of getting kids to look at the history of the place of Patuxent Village through the indigenous history and colonial history, and then looking at the present day. And then thinking about what it would have been like to be somebody from the past. And we focused pretty much on the Native people as well as the African American people who had lived there. And then they created postcard images, which were then sent to present day residents, and asking them to respond in kind in terms of what their lives were like, a dialogue about that, and their concept of freedom. And this was a project that Rich had sort of thrown out to people and said, this is post 9/11, and what does freedom mean to us today? And I worked with a folklorist, Michael Bell, and that was really great to collaborate with him. And that was the beginning of, sort of really working with someone else in a different discipline. But the second project we didn't get the turnout that we had expected from the community, because they felt that they had already done it before. And so it was like, oh gosh, we've got this funding, we've got to make this project happen, what do we do? And I had seen a presentation by a couple of artists from England that had set up a storefront and just invited the people to come in, and there was a map on the wall, and it's like, okay, write about what places are special to you here. So there was an empty storefront in Patuxent Village, and so we that was sort of in the back of my mind. But before we jumped to that, I just set up a table outside a coffee shop with a map that the kids had created, a present-day map, and people coming by, I asked them to identify a special spot to them in the village. We wanted the inside story of what was special about this place. And they created a personal symbol that they put on the map, and then wrote about why that was special. And then to create a history map, we set up a sort of a pop-up museum in an empty storefront. So it was the beginning of kind of moving myself out of the classroom and onto the streets, and that was very new to me. And then I did another project, Languages of the Land, a dialogue with the Downs, which I actually didn't even think about being in the classroom and just went straight to being in this park and talking to people, giving them cameras to photograph their special spots, and then Michael and I interviewed people, and then that became a book, which I had done some big panels for, the idea behind that was, okay, what is this place as if the land was witness to the interaction of human beings to this place. And then there was an audio portion of from the interviews that people did, so you could walk through this piece and then hear the stories. And so that really did get me out of the classroom and, you know, working with the public. But and then when Bob came and said he wanted somebody to work with the public about the signs, I was already primed to just be working there. And I don't know how to define myself. It's very hard, so I just say artist.
Just use what you've been using.
Because it is a creative way of thinking. I mean, I feel like there's, you know, an artist pulls together various things and creates something out of them, and it's pulling together various different people and organizations and sort of seeing how to connect things, I guess, and making something new and new ways of looking at old things, and I don't know.
Holly and Drake both, when we talked originally, I remember we had this conversation about the way that a lot of times female artists are asked to give up their individual practice because their work has become organizing based or coordination based, and that, oh look, that's your practice now. Like there's this sort of condescending way in which the female artist is expected to do that kind of work as a type of female labor, and that a male artist might never be assumed to have the same relationship to their labor. And I'm wondering if maybe you could retrace those steps that we traced that day and reflect on that a little bit.
Well, it's funny, when we before it began today, I was like, oh my God, I feel like we're giving a presentation now, and I just wanted to sort of talk about, and then we had like this love fest together of getting back together and having this conversation, in part because Holly had said, you know, she isn't feeling like an artist, and I was like, I never don't think of you as an artist. I mean, I can't, but what's so interesting, and I'll get to your question, is that as you were just talking, I've always known you as that kind of artist. So I don't know if there's a term for it, but whatever that is, you've always been that. But I think of you as an artist. So I kind of am intrigued by our labels, our lack of labels, and how do you do that? And I think I'm going to address, and then I'll be quiet, but I very much think that there's a liberty, and other folks should chime in and say yes, no, whatever, but that there's a liberty taken with women around, oh, don't worry, you're not in the studio. You know, look at what you built here, wherever it is, fill in blank. For me, there have been many different places. And I don't know a lot of male artists for whom that has happened in quite the same way. I also think that women are often assumed to be organizers. Now the question I guess I would also put out there is, artist as organizer. So if we don't have a term for what that is, if you're looking for like what would Holly call herself, and there is an aspect of art making that I think is about just that. We just don't quite know what to call it, but I definitely know that for me, when I was still making art, there was a point where art went from being what I was doing to being how I figured out my problems. And an example of that would be, I was working on a pretty political, sort of highly charged race project in the South, and it was, I'm so anxious to be here. And it involved a lot of things, university, very sort of town gown stuff, race in class, and it was pretty intense. And at one point, the Klan was like leaving me dead animals and hanging things, breaking into my office and hanging things. So let's just say it was a little stressful. And I realized actually fairly recently, and unpacking some boxes, that the way I sorted out problems, so I was no longer making art, but the way I sorted out those problems was to sketch installations that I wanted to do around the project. And that was how I actually worked through the problems. I never made that work, it'll never be made, but I mean, I would do these really intensive, right down to materials I would need and where it would be located. And I realized that that was sort of my transition out of practice, was to use that process to solve problems in the work I was doing. And I think it was also trying to handle people saying, oh, this is your art now. You're doing this thing in the community, it's your art. So I think it's a hard one, because I think that a big part of your art is exactly how you intersect so beautifully, and your commitment to that. Like, that is a form of your art. But I never want to say to anyone, oh, that's your art now. So it's it's a really complex subject, I think.
Well, one thing that you know, here's one suggestion. You might say that you're an artist in context.
Okay.
Yes.
Can I make a statement from ignorance? And so I've never heard the word practice before used in this context. That tells you where I'm coming from. So I would call Holly a public health official. I'm from the health department, and she gets it. And so I don't know whether it's gender, but what's the relative importance of art compared to people, and your own personal art compared to the people that you're doing this for or with or whatever. And for Holly's assignment from about signs, which she neglected to emphasize in her presentation, is that for a year and a half we never saw a sign.
That was DOT.
And the reason was that it would be useless to do that unless you engage this community. That if you put up a sign next to something nobody cares about, it's just more garbage. And so what Holly managed to do that nobody really appreciates is build a constituency for this resource. A few years earlier, Groundworks, that beautiful picture of the log cabin next to the pond, Groundworks was they had a canoe program for kids in Providence. I thought that was fantastic. And they were worried about the contaminants there. And I was telling them, okay, you need a hand washing facility because there's bacteria in the water. If the boat turns over, I want you to wash these kids down, and there's contaminants in the soil, and I want their shoes scraped before they go someplace. And they're freaking out. But if you don't have a constituency, you don't have anything. And then they found toxic algae in the water, and that was it. It's like, this is too much. So now, and this has nothing to do with Gorham, right? So now we're going to put millions into cleaning up this site, and there's no constituency for cleaning up the rest. And so that's what Holly built. And it wasn't single-handedly, but if she hadn't done all that, there'd never be this whole group of people around her saying, we ought to clean this up. And by the way, all these people over in Roger Williams are exposed to the same stuff. We should do something about that too. So maybe this is getting off the track there, but who's most likely to, what sort of mindset is most likely to see their work in that kind of context? It's a pretty remarkable person. So I don't think it's necessarily gender, but some genders are more likely to see the big picture than others, and be less self-absorbed, perhaps. And then I'd be interested to hear what other people say. But the other thing that this led to is us working with a classroom about where does health come from. And I have this really pangs of guilt. I'm somewhat responsible for the fact that you had to spend $1 million. Because Rhode Island 20 years ago, I developed the lead standards, and they are very strict, and I'm sorry.
They're very strict.
I owe you $1 million.
I learned a lot,
so,
though. I learned a lot.
Yeah, well, that's good.
And now people come to me and want me to consult in their applications to EPA, so,
Yeah, well,
they don't want to pay me, though. That's the only problem.
But, and I don't have a public health background, so I'm not really suited for my job, but it doesn't take much to realize that there is a connection between art and health. I mean, how can you have a healthy life and no appreciation for art and things around you? If you have no appreciation for that, I mean, what kind of life is that? Is it a healthy life? I don't think so. And so, who is going to promote that? Why isn't there an art department in the Department of Health?
That's a good question.
And how are we going to get there? Because that's what has to happen. And I happen to work with physicians that believe that physicians have very little to do with health, and that we need to get back into the schools and get back into art classes and do these other things. So that's a wonderful place to work and be, and I really got off the track. Comment, which I thought was a very good one.
Great track. Well, and that also I think connects to this one thing that I think is coming out of both of these projects, which is this connection to Native communities and the history that's far deeper and more expansive than I think we think of when we start with Roger Williams. Not to say that there's anything wrong with starting with colonial history, but the Native history seems to be connecting all the dots. There's an appreciation for a holistic way of thinking about the environment and life ways, and I wonder if you guys can talk a little bit about how you think moving forward, like Native informants and sort of Native practices can be a lifeline for both the Woonasquatucket watershed and for the urban ponds in this area.
Well, it's very interesting working with the indigenous community. It's very complicated, and I've been doing it. I guess it started with that project in Patuxet for maybe 7 years or something, and I'm still learning and making mistakes. And I don't know quite how to answer the question, except that I'm really keeping them in the conversation with what we're doing. And the group that I worked with at the Tomaquag Museum was right there in the procession, very proudly carrying. I enlarged some of the collages that they had made, and they carried them very proudly in the procession. And I keep them abreast of talks that are happening here at Brown, which I think one's happening next Wednesday about Native Americans and toxins in the environment that Phil Brown's doing, and somebody from that group is coming. So I think it's a long, I see the two, the whole sustainability movement and that group, kind of definitely connecting, but it's complicated. But I just think getting the dialogue going is good, and I will keep connecting them, and I hope that they will still be part of the procession, even though we're not focusing on that aspect of our history of the pond this year. It's still, I want everybody to be mindful of it. And I'm excited about this book that they've made, and we'll use that in the classroom, and hopefully we'll get it to other teachers in classrooms too. And they're very, very proud of it, so it's great.
When you say it's complicated, what's complicated?
Politically. It's just a lot of different factions within the indigenous people, and hierarchies, and who can tell what, and
So their internal structure
their
makes
internal
it
stuff
difficult.
is really
Okay.
tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I sort of understand. I have it at this point. I have make sense of it in my own way, and that there's this group that's kind of education based, and then there's sort of leaders in terms of tribe standing, and then there's another group over here. So it's trying to kind of figure out which to access. John Brown's going to be coming and being part of a panel discussion in this class I'm doing at Brown this coming week. And whereas I worked with people out of the Tomaquag Museum for the book, it's like kind of trying to figure out where to pull. Steve, you shaking your head. Do you have anything to add?
It's very difficult.
Yeah.
The official structure and the actual structures are different, and the families don't always get along.
Yeah, it's a beautiful.
And you're only dealing with one tribe.
What?
You're only dealing with one time.
Yeah, right.
It's really complicated when there's several.
Right.
Well, I'm trying to honor the place, the people that
Right.
were in the place, kind of thing. I've learned that.
I wonder if each of you could talk a little bit about how you measure the success or the impact of your work.
Certainly for the Steelyard, one of them I mentioned, that's kind of odd in things like not getting our work tagged, certainly. But actually, for us, there are a couple different areas that we're focusing on right now. Open enrollment classes, which is really just about getting folks to get involved in making things. It's a very simple idea. You know, if people make things, they have a different engagement with the world. And we have a lot of success in that area with people who just are super excited and start their own whatever. They're going to go make the thing that they always dreamed they would make, or you know, younger kids who want to come back and take advanced classes. And I think that has its own kind of way of, I think that's a more kind of easy idea about engaging people in stuff and letting it just kind of simmer through the community, and there's no agenda there other than, you know. I think we have more of an agenda with our workforce training, and that to us is a very critical part of trying to point out that their manufacturing isn't really gone in Rhode Island, that it got a little bit out of scale, and again, thinking about those histories that people lost track of, and the traditions that are still here from the learning. We have a lot of really elders of the manufacturing community who come back and give us equipment or tell us about this quirky way that they used to do something. And so there's this sort of local knowledge that we're trying to engage in a new generation. So there are lots of different angles to that. There's the business side, which is how do we successfully get these kids in here, train them in metalworking, and then find them jobs, and can we do that? And so what we started to do with this program, which is only now, I think, in its third year, is really trying to track them over time. And we are not, I mean, it's really interesting in that sense, although we focus our workforce training with an arts focus in that we want to make unique street amenities or unique objects. So we train them with this view towards, you know, let your imagination go, take this idea and run with it, but you're also getting these skills and you actually make a good weld, and you know. We don't necessarily measure it as they have to become an artist. We're not trying to make artists, and I think that's a really important distinction we had to sit down and understand and say out loud, and it was a little bit dirty. You know, it was a little bit like, well, I'm not sure we can say that. Can we say that we're not trying to build more artists? But we're not. We really believe that their experience and the folks they meet who teach and who are mentoring and who are working at the Steelyard generally every day, it's a pretty busy place, will somehow change the trajectory of where they're headed. So when we track them, there's no answer we're looking for. It's not, you got a job, you're working in an arts environment, or it's really something changed for you. And you didn't go back to either some kind of an offense that landed you back in jail, you didn't kind of have a bad experience with something and you suddenly weren't showing up to see your parole officer. The majority of the kids we work with in these programs are they're not able to go into a lot of programs because they have records, or they are in some way not able to, from an age standpoint, get into a program, because 18 to 24-year-olds in Rhode Island are very overlooked. If you have too many strikes against you, you're out of a lot of programs. Many of them, in fact most of them, don't really have any kind of support at home. And all of those are ways that we look at choosing them. So,
how many kids are there?
But per program, it's about 10 per program. And for example, right now we're doing a 3-week program. 10 students will go through. We'll have trained with the Bank of America program about 30. And right now, the last group we did, this group of 10, we lost one. She got pregnant, and we didn't want to keep her in the welding studio. Now, that in itself is a story about who's coming to these programs and what support network will she now have. She wanted to stay, and she kept coming back to visit the program, but didn't stay in the program. So we look at retention. We look at what people are doing afterwards. We look at how much they communicate, how often they connect in with us. We try to hire them back, because we know that's another form of mentorship. So those are ways we try to do that. And then we also look at how much they become stewards of other people coming to us, which tends to happen a lot. So they will introduce their friends, and they'll bring them in and say, can they get into this program? Or, how could they get involved here? So that's from the workforce side. And then pretty critically, our public projects program, which is the bike racks, the tree guards, et cetera, that we put all over the city. That's really sort of our way of trying to change the physical landscape of the state and the area. It's very intentional. It's using money that typically would go to catalog purchases from Wisconsin, and our goal is to keep it local and to really we source, design, build, and install, all with local suppliers, or if we can't do a process, local processing. And that work is really about how do we get a sense of pride in a neighborhood and a sort of sense of creativity. And that work is much further in. We've been doing that a lot longer. And what we're finding now is we're getting copied, which, as we know, is actually an interesting way to assess how you're doing. And RIPTA just put out a really interesting RFP that's for bus shelters, which they've been doing, but now they also come with a bike rack and an artistic trash can. And when we started this, and everyone were like, what do you mean artistic trash can? It's a trash can, and artistic recycling bins. And so our language is now, one-of-a-kind artistic is now kind of finding its way into, and so that's a way that we measure, because our intent is to change how people think about neighborhoods and cities. And so that's a kind of it's like all good measurements, I think they have to be over the long term. But that's got a little more time on it. So.
It was fun when you said you're not trying to create artists. It reminded me when my daughter was in 5th grade, they had something at the casino at Roger Williams for young authors. And they got somebody to bind a book they had, each kid had done. One of the people there came up to her and said, so, do you want to be an artist? Or do you want to be an author? And she goes, I am an author.
I made a book.
That's a great example.
So I think maybe a lot of the people that you didn't think what you were making into artists think of themselves as artists now.
Sure. And we're not, that's amazing, but I think it's about not wanting to be, like not intending it necessarily.
Right.
Are all the people teaching artists?
No, actually, some are. We tend to pair up. Our teachers are usually an instructor and then a TA. So sometimes you'll get a career welder from Electric Boat who teaches, who'll have a RISD student or a graduate who's a TA, or vice versa, RISD grad. And so we tend to try to shake it up. The people who teach workforce training, typically the lead teacher would probably not self-identify as an artist. Self-identify.
Okay.
And that I actually think sometimes is very important to how the project runs in a way.
So to address your question, I think one of the things is the participation of the procession, which has been growing each year, except for the second year. But and then one of the big things that I'm really interested in is the number of artists that come to want to be part of Urban Pond Procession, because I just hope that if I can contribute to more artists going into this kind of work, that would be real success, because I think we need it. The world needs it.
Yeah, demands it.
Yeah. I mean, creative, outside-the-box solutions have got to be come up with, and and working with the public, and just engaging community, pulling people together, and so the more I can, encourage other artists to go into this kind of work. I mean, I think that would be real great success, as well as more us reaching more students and a greater population. So we're adding, hopefully, Reservoir Elementary School this year, and we're keeping up with Sophia Academy, and the artists that we worked with last year have gone on to work in, have new employees and work in new situations, and they want to bring this content into their workplace, so that, and I think it's kind of wonderful. I mean, there's tons of art classes, but if you can bring in this kind of content into an art class, I mean, that would be great. And so I'd love to sort of see more of that. I mean, I'm not great on the measuring, but I have ideas of, I think if it grows, I think that would be a great sense of, showing its progress.
What really stands out to me from both of you is how the work you've done has expanded rather than having art defined in some small way. You've really expanded it. And I think that's the way to go. How else does it open and reach more people? And artisan context, you know, I don't know, there's more connections, more connecting the dots. And even though all this attention on the steel yard has had to do with the cleanup, the steel yard is so well loved. I mean, wherever I go in Providence, and you bring up the steel yard, people love the steel yard. You've connected with the community there, external to that particular area, and everyone relates to the environmental work. So it's none of it. To me, it's all art. You know, if you look at art in this bigger way of how we think, and you had said that earlier, it's a way of thinking and problem solving. So I think it's really inspiring.
And we're all creative. I mean, you know, and Jason, I mean, you know, that's what New Urban Arts is all about. And it's just, you know, instilling that, nurturing that thread that we all have, you know, and it's key.
Yeah. I was asked to do an article for the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston because they like to do pieces that include things on the arts, which is great. And the question they posed was, can you answer this question? How does art affect poorer communities? Something like that. I was like, oh, I can't answer that question in 2 little words. I mean, it was like a tiny piece, you know. And I kind of got really panicked. I was like, I don't know. And then I said yes, and then there it was. You know, I said yes. And but what I found myself writing about, and I actually wrote about organizations here in Rhode Island, which was the task was really in Rhode Island. But I focused on a couple of organizations, but I also really focused on this kind of work, and I talked about, you know, let's leave some of this out. You know, I can't really speak to, does the museum show, I don't want to speak to that, but I really want to talk about the place where the work is happening, where artists see themselves as, you know, putting themselves in a position of saying, well, we can make a difference, and this is how I think about the world, and that's my training or my kind of mindset. But it's that place, you know, where an artist says, well, we're going to mutually define this, you know, which I think the Pond Project is a great example of that. You know, you sort of put yourself out there, you're a catalyst in many ways, and you're certainly an organizer, but, you know, then you kind of let go, you know, and you sort of let things happen. And I'm so impressed by that as I think about people I know here in Rhode Island and other places where there's this kind of, it's the art that people don't think of often when they say art. We might all think about it, but it is that moment. And it was kind of funny to have this article say, oh, wait a second, I'm just going to kind of change the focus and answer it a little bit differently in a way, which I'm sure was fine. They said it was okay. So, but, you know, it was fun to sort of sit down and really think about that and think about where that place is that, you know, we get to do the work. So even though you were panicked and needed to go to Odd Park, to reconnect, you know, it never really stopped.
Yeah, but I think, you know, when you do this kind of work, you're putting out a lot.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like mothers. You're putting out a lot. You're taking care of a lot. Mm-hmm. And you really need to, I mean, I need to replenish, mm-hmm. you know, and that's by, you know, being able to go to some place like Eye Park and, you know, I didn't get a lot of sleep, but I replenished in a different kind of way. It was just great to, like, be able to really put a lot of energy into that. And I, you know, Ann Hamilton talks about that, the hands, you know, the knowledge in the hands, and there's something I need to keep doing. That's still very much a big part of me. Be talking like this and making stuff. So, and it's that balance we all need, you know, reflection and then going out into the world reflecting. And I think not enough of us take the time to reflect, and I think all of us, back to health, you know, need to have that time.
I think one of the interesting things critically about this work is that over the years this kind of work has often been in a kind of more negative way dismissed as it doesn't really seem like art because it looks like something else or appears to be something else. Like Suzanne Lacey used to always be criticized, like, well, why is this art rather than just social work or something?
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's really interesting to turn the tables and just, you know, precisely because it is occupying these different kinds of spaces, the durations are often prolonged, but also sometimes often unpredictable. Artists are often involved in projects for many, many years, and that means that their roles invariably have to change. And if you feel profoundly committed to this work, as clearly the two of you do, you really have to think about like kind of the succession of this work, and what does it mean to be doing the work now, and if you believe that this work needs to happen in the future, again, how do you start to build that culture? It's almost like like what is the legacy of this work? And it's I think it's a real challenge because of all of those issues, and there are so many people that become involved and invested in and develop sort of expectations for the work. But again, I think it's the richness of the work and not some sort of diminishment of the work. But I think it's very difficult because we have these paradigms about how we write about art, how we think about art, and we have to work on our sort of cultural language and discourse and our critical discourse in this work.
Yeah.
And where it gets counted. I mean, one of the things I talk about in that article is I think there's a lot of work happening that doesn't get counted as art's impact.
Yeah.
Because we're very caught up in the metrics of, did we create this vibrant indicator here, or did we? And I think there's a lot of reason that we have that, but I think we have a hard time getting away from the things we can count being very clearly arts related. And of course it ends up being very economic, which is a whole other piece that can be very odd sometimes. But this kind of work, often I think, for example, the changes we'll see for the youth we work with, I don't think it'll ever be picked up as an arts impact, because it'll be employment related, or going back to school related, or healthy family related, or some kind of a stability measurement. And it will never be seen as an arts impact, because we won't control that. It kind of goes into another place, and so the neighborhood will look stronger, or but then how do we claim it as in the arts sector? How do we say
it's not an arts funding stream? That's things like workforce development.
Yeah.
So they get the credit, quote.
And I find that really, and I don't, I'm so challenged by that, because I think a lot about even Bank of America, they don't think they're giving arts funding. I know they don't. And I was happy to have that money to do the work, but they're actually doing funding in the arts. It is actually that.
Actually, I should just quickly say that at the end of next year, 2012, Artisan Context is going to do a national convening for funders and cultural policy people, and report back the learning that we've done in New England over these 2 years, and then take that learning and put it in a national context. But the underlying purpose of it is to really sort of be a translator. From the practice to the funding, and to help funders understand these hybrid practices and understand the impact that they have. And even though you might not be able to measure it entirely, quantitatively, getting them interested in measurement that is, again, sort of hybrid. So I think that's a role that Artisan Context is seeking to play, is that of interpreter and translator, to try and get these funders to understand.
Well, it creates a feedback loop.
Yeah.
So that informs maybe future funding, right?
And it's a cultural issue as well, because at Zymetica, we create medical devices.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that we do. And what makes us really good at it is that we have an arts core.
Right.
Yeah.
But how do you teach that, and how do you get a client to buy in? They don't want to hear that. They want to know what it's going to cost, when is it going to get done, can you get us through the FDA, And this all comes of our culture, because they don't realize that why they get a much better device is the problem-solving approach that we take that is unique. And it's because this company began as an industrial design company. And so they see through that lens. They see through an artistic lens as well. So I think that issue is part of our whole culture.
Yeah, definitely.
And yay, please do it.
I think certainly for funders getting siloed for an organization like ours, they always want us to be an arts organization. And they say, well, we do work for, do you want to be in economic development? I'm like, no, I actually kind of want to be in both places.
Yeah. Right.
Oh,
I'm
that's
asking to have a foot in both places.
Yeah.
And they're like,
Yeah.
no, I don't think so.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we've had some funders approach us saying, well, you're kind of an environmental organization. Like, actually, we're not. We did this project, but we're not. I mean, it's very interesting that they just really want us in one
That's right.
place.
Mhm.
And I mean, I've had actually, you know, not arguments in a mean way, but kind of just firm, like, I don't want to be slotted here. Please let me write this to the things that we're strong with, and let me write about how they intersect. And sometimes they let me do it, and I'm sure they're like, yeah, okay, here's your workforce training money. Like, you know,
Yeah.
glad you knocked yourself out in that paragraph, but, you know. So,
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, that's where we're different in that Urban Pine Procession, we have decided we do not want to become a 501c3. We do not want that overhead. We do not want that headache. And we want to just remain being a group of, you know, primarily volunteer artists. Though we do get funding. We've gotten funding from Rich, from RISCA, and yay for the Rhode Island Foundation that sees the whole picture. And also we've submitted a grant to EPA, but didn't get funded, but we just barely missed it, and now we know how to answer their questions better. So, I mean, we're going to go after funding from these different areas that we touch, and remain a nimble organization that can't be categorized exactly. And Janice, I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but you know, it's you know, we definitely, and that's where, I mean, I feel like I learn from other people. I'm learning from Jason, I'm learning from Drake, these organizations that I really respect, but I want to figure out what I don't want to do and how. I'm not sure what I know exactly what we're going to do, but we're doing okay now to stay on the surfboard kind of things.
Well, on that note, it is 2:30. Thank you so much. For hosting us in their beautiful space. The next event is actually on the back of your book. It's in the Jewelry District at the Spot Underground. There are two locations for the Spot. One is on Thayer Street. This location is in the Jewelry District on Elbow and Chestnut. If you have a hard time finding it, ask Madi or Micah.
Former Century Lounge.
Former Century Lounge.
very